As president of the Ounce of Prevention Fund and Illinois' First Lady, Diana is uniquely qualified to share her thoughts on the importance of early childhood development and how investing in our children from the beginning can completely change a child's future and the community for the better. As president of the Ounce of Prevention Fund, Diana is passionate about early learning. The Ounce of Prevention Fund is a public-private partnership that prepares children for success in school and in life. Her journey to this position has certainly given her real-world experience in understanding the need for all children to have a successful start in life. Diana holds a PhD in developmental psychology from the University of Chicago, an MBA from the Stanford Graduate School of Business, and a bachelor's degree from Yale University. Married to Governor Bruce Rauner, Diana serves as First Lady of Illinois. Diana and Bruce are the proud parents of 6 children and 1 son-in-law. Please welcome Diana Rauner.
It's really just a pleasure to be here and a great honor. And I have to say, I was overwhelmed by the video. I kind of lost track of myself because I was so impressed with the amount of impact that you have had in really such a short time. And I just want to ask for another round of applause because the work that you're doing here in Lake County is extraordinary. You know, I have to say that when Bruce was elected, people said, "Well, you're the First Lady. What are you going to do? What's your cause?" And I said, "Well, I already have a cause. I'm working on that cause for a long time. But I do have a vision for our state, and it's a vision in which every baby in Illinois gets at least 1 home visit. And those of you who have been involved in home visiting here, and the many partners who work with home visiting know what a powerful impact parent coaching can have. And it is a dream, perhaps, but it's something that we have, as a state, already begun to work on, to think about how we can ensure that every family has access to a home visitor, and those who need more support can get that too. So, you know, to some extent, I've taken a very long journey to get here, not because I had to come so far. I just came up the road from Winnetka this morning. But as you heard, I didn't start out doing this work, and really came to early childhood through my work in finance and my very first job, actually. So I came, as you heard, I have a little bit of a varied background. I started out from college on Wall Street. I worked on Wall Street for a couple of years in a traditional sort of junior dirtbag job where you work 90 hours a week. And after 2 years, I was promoted and I was given an office, at which point I decided I was a grown-up because I had an office. Then, as grown-ups do, you're supposed to go out, and my parents had taught me this, you go out and volunteer in the world. And so I went down the street from my house to a settlement house in Chelsea, and I began tutoring ex-cons in reading, for which I was uniquely unqualified. I didn't know the first thing about how to teach reading. I knew how to read. But I sat across the table from young men my age who couldn't read, and this was absolutely mind-blowing for me because I was a studious, quiet young girl for whom books were everything. And the idea that there were people in the world who couldn't read, it was as though they were missing a sentence. I'd never come across that. And that really, you know, you don't need to have a PhD to make the connection between not being able to read and being an ex-con. So that was really, for me, where I started to get on the path of thinking about and trying to address the challenge of educational inequities. It is the case for many of us, and certainly for me, that education has been the path to really everything good that's happened in my life. And my grandmother left school in 8th grade, and my mother was the first in her family to graduate from college. And I have 3 fancy degrees. That is the American dream, and I believe that that is really what makes our country great. It's what I believe we all need to provide for every child. So really, I came to early childhood because that's where all the really interesting science is. There's interesting science across human development, but babies' brains and what happens in the first years of life is just, it's fascinating. And frankly, we've learned so much about it in the last couple of decades. And there's been really an explosion of knowledge. So for me, that's so exciting intellectually. But what really gets me out of bed is the idea that we can take this science and use it really to change the trajectories of people's lives and really address those inequities that when I was young I saw at the back end. So what I'm going to do this morning for 20 minutes is just really talk a little bit about building brains, how the brain is experience dependent, how environments affect brain building, and what we can do to build better brains for all babies. So let's see if I can make this work. Yes, okay. So I wanted to spend a couple minutes on some of the really cool science, and I hope it's not too early in the morning for you guys on this stuff. But you know, what we've learned in the last couple of decades is that the brain is really built after birth, and that is an extraordinary concept. It's really unique among all species, and it has to do with the fact that our brains are so big and we walk upright, so we really have to do all the brain building after we're born. And in fact, in the first few years of life, in the first year of life, we're building our brain and we're building the connections between the neurons at a ridiculous rate. 700 synapses, those are the connections between neurons, every second. That's just an extraordinary number. And what happens is in the first 3 years of life, our brain basically builds connections between neurons almost indiscriminately. You hear about babies being described, brains as being described as plastic. This is why they're plastic, because during this rapid period of growth, they're getting inputs. Everything that happens in their environment essentially creates another synapse, another roadmap. We think about babies not being able to pay attention. The reality is they can't not pay attention. They're paying attention to everything. And this is actually why their brains are so plastic. What happens after about, somewhere around 5 or 6, is that the brain starts to prune those synapses and use only the really important ones. This is why adult brains are so focused and purpose-driven, but it's also why the adult brain has a harder time learning everything. So what we know is that as brains develop, the synapses become thicker and fewer. And so by the time we get to the adults, we have very efficient brains for reading, for writing, for driving. But we're not so good at learning new things, like learning a new language. So what we know is that brains are experience dependent. This is actually how brains are constructed. They're constructed with enormous amounts of information, and they adapt immediately and in real time to the environments and the inputs that they have. And really, it's experience that causes pruning and shapes the brain. So what's really interesting about all of this is that we really didn't know that a lot of this for a long time, or we actually thought that not much was going on inside babies' heads. And it's just in the past couple of years that we've been able, this looks like a big fancy hairdryer, but what it is actually is a tool that allows us to see inside babies' brains. And it's called a magnetic encephalography machine. And it's sort of like an MRI, a very, very safe machine. But it allows us to actually literally see babies' synapses fire as children hear sounds or feel touches. So let me just show you this video. I hope it's going to work. What this is footage from that Meg machine and the little hairdryer. And what you can see is that in this loop is that when a baby is spoken to, that part of the brain in the back part of the brain that lights up. That's what you would expect. So when a child hears sounds, actually the part of his brain that's interested in language literally lights up. But what's really cool, and what nobody knew until they could see inside, okay, it gave up on me. Let's see if I can make that. No, sorry. Try it. No. Right, we'll try it again. Because what's very cool here is what we learned is that in addition to having the part of the brain that hears sound light up, what people found is that pre-verbal babies, like 3-month-old babies, the part of their brain that produces sound also lights up. So what they were doing while they were hearing sounds is actually learning how to speak. And we don't think of that as happening because we think that speech happens much later. But what we're learning is that experience is creating the baby's brain even as they're talking. So what we know as well is that in fact those are the connections that create the ability to read. So again, we think of reading as being something that children learn when they're 6. What we now know is that the connection between the part of the brain that hears words and the part of the brain that creates words, those synapses between those two parts of the brain are what creates the ability to read, and that is laid down in infancy. So by the time a child is 5 and pre-verbal and supposed to be learning to read, if the child hasn't been spoken to appropriately over the last 5 years, then that synapse isn't ready, it isn't prepared, and that child won't be able to read. And so these are really fascinating opportunities to understand really the construction of those skills that you all have seen the evidence from in terms of those good interactions. But it's really fascinating to us all to actually see that developmental psychologists have actually started to figure out how can we actually see children learn, and how can we see evidence, again, of sounds and the brain development. One of the other really exciting pieces of evidence that's come out of this brain scanning is actually seeing what children know and when they know it. One of the most interesting things that we know about children is when they're born, they can hear all different sounds. The sounds, they're essentially speakers of any language, or observers and absorbers of any language. So there's a whole lot of sound patterns that we as native English speakers don't understand from other languages. Chinese, Spanish, in fact, Japanese have sound patterns that we can't even distinguish, and vice versa, of course. What we know is that when children are born, they can hear all the sounds, and we can figure that out by just seeing their eye gaze and following their eye gaze. But between about 8 months and 10 months, we know that children actually become specialists in their own language. And why do they do that? Because all of us have to prune synapses that we don't need and we don't use, so that the things that we do need to do, we'll get better at. And children are actually, in that critical period, actually losing abilities, but also gaining abilities in their native language. So whereas 6-month-old infants can hear all different sounds, by 10 months, they can only recognize the sounds of their native language. And this is actually sort of one fascinating way that we've actually also learned that we can prevent this from happening by continuing to expose children to different languages. And so what's really interesting, so what's happening? What are babies doing? Well, really, literally, they are taking statistics. They're like little statistical processing machines. And the more information that they get, again, remember, they're getting all this information into this extremely dynamic brain. And the more information that they get, they essentially say, these are the things that I need to focus on. So in English, we have the R and the L. Those are sounds that we all would never have trouble distinguishing. In Japanese, it's not very important. So Japanese speakers actually have trouble distinguishing between those two sounds. And that's actually one of the many ways in which, while Japanese and American babies look exactly the same at 6 months, by 12 months, they look really different. And this again, these babies are just essentially taking statistics and learning how to understand their world. We sometimes call babies the scientists in the crib, and the reason for that is that they are experimenting, they're observing and absorbing as scientists. They're processing information in the way that scientists do, or that large computers do, machine learning computers. We know that babies look longer at unlikely events, like things that are impossible in physics, or defying gravity. So babies are actually really, as I said, they are processors of experience, and these experiences in infancy are literally shaping their brain. So when we talk about environments for young children, we're really talking about the millions and millions of experiences that their brains are absorbing and using to shape their brains. So what happens when those environments are very, very different? And this, unfortunately, is where we get to what we have called the achievement gap. Many of you have probably seen this slide. It's gotten quite a lot of press lately. It's actually from a very old study at this point, about 30-year-old study, of the differences in children's development in different environments. And some researchers back in the 80s went into different kinds of homes, the homes of college-educated parents, the homes of what they called working-class parents, those were people who had a high school degree, and the homes of high school dropouts, families that weren't working. And what they did was they literally recorded all of the language that was addressed to the vocal child in the family for a really long period of time. And these daily exchanges, what they found were there were tremendous differences in the quantity of speech, of actual volumes of words that were used. They also found tremendous differences in the quality of speech. So what they found is that in homes of college-educated families, there were a lot more questions, open-ended questions, much more variety in vocabulary, and much more positive affect, more congratulation, warm, encouraging sounds. In less educated families, they found many more directives, don't do that, stop, negative affect, and fewer vocabulary words. And what you can see is this is the outcome of those very different backgrounds. This is looking at children's vocabulary development from really the first time that children begin to learn language or produce language, which is around 16 or 18 months. And then that language explosion where kids are learning a word every day, it seems. And what we find here is by the age of 3, there's a huge difference already. The achievement gap is well in place. And as you can see from those brain slides, in fact, the achievement gap, you could see inside the brain that that achievement gap already exists. And how do we close an achievement gap like that exists at age 3 for so many children? We cannot possibly ask the school system to do that. We've also seen evidence now, more recent research, that in fact there's differences even in the way that the children are processing language even at younger ages. So one of the really interesting sets of research is coming out of Stanford on language processing. That's how quickly your brain actually hears and absorbs the sounds and identifies the sounds. So if a parent says, the dog is on the sofa, if the child understands and can identify the word dog, then by the time you get to on the sofa, the child's ready to understand what you're saying and can start to learn the word sofa. If the child's still thinking about, what was that word dog, what does that mean? That child isn't ready to learn about the next word, sofa. So the point of this slide is that, again, we can find that there are differences in actual brain processing speed that are associated with income and socioeconomic status, so parent and education and income. By 18 months, these kids are 6 months behind. That's a terrifying statistic. And what we also see, again from brain science, is that there are anatomical evidence of environmental effects as well. So in fact, researchers have found a correlation between socioeconomic status and the degree of hemispheric specialization in the parts of the brain that have to do with language and memory and speech. And it also, so this suggests that the weaker language skills that we saw on that slide are not due to just an absence of information. They're actually evidence of anatomical differences in brain development. And that's really terrifying because these are things that are hard to overcome. If your gray matter just isn't there, it's going to be really, really hard for you to build on it. So this is why the earliest experiences are so important. We also know that as important as these issues are for language, for school success, they're equally important for health. We know that persistent poverty, negative relationships, violence, drug use, food insecurity, these are all incredibly stressful experiences for families and for children. And these experiences are a different kind of stress from the vital normal stress that we all feel when we have a lot of pressure, when we get cut off on the highway, when we get frightened or something unusual happens. It's normal to have some kind of stress in your life. But when we do have those stressful experiences, and we've all had them, when our brain floods with adrenaline, when our heart rate increases, when our respiration increases, we know that all we're focusing on that moment is the threat and the experience. Now, for most of us, that goes away pretty quickly. Our heart rate goes back to normal, and we go back to business. We call this persistent or toxic stress. And this has powerful effects on the brain. Again, this is a brain that is continually flooded with the stress hormones that are related to fear. And this actually keeps the brain in a state of high alert all the time. And that has tremendous effects on, again, the production of gray matter, of synaptic strength in the most important parts of the brain for functioning. So as this slide shows us, children who have had experiences of what we would call toxic stress have far less well-developed prefrontal cortexes. That's where all of the important work that we do in business, school, and life goes on, than people who have had healthy development. And these are anatomical differences. And we know that there are varying degrees of trauma, clearly, but we know that unresponsive environments, poor quality childcare, depressed or unavailable parents, chaotic living environments, these are levels of stress, persistent stress, that have measurable effects on brain development, particularly in the first 5 years of life. So these are children who, instead of developing the skills ready for school, are actually developing maladaptive stress response systems and maladaptive interactions. We also know that these effects have, that these situations have effects on health as well. And we know that multiple effects of poverty, of trauma, of adverse experiences early in life have tremendous effects on long-term physical health and vitality. There's a very famous study called the Adverse Child Experiences Study, which looked at 17,000 adults and asked them about their early experiences. And what they found is that the more adverse early experiences you had early in life, the more likely adults were to have, of course, self-damaging behaviors like substance abuse or eating disorders, but more interestingly, also to be more likely to have cancer, to be more likely to have strokes, and heart disease. And the suggestion is, in fact, that stress is literally wearing down their bodies in a way that makes them less healthy over time. So infants are born learning from their environments. And this variation in environments has tremendous consequences for the development. So what are we going to do? What do we do about this? And what we have to recognize is that it's really easy to change child behavior. We always joke in our organization that babies are always changing all the time. It's easy to change children's behavior. What's hard is changing adult behavior. And really that's what we need to do in order to provide great environments for all young children. And of course, the good news about all of this is that it's actually worth doing. It's very worth doing for all of us to be this involved, because there's a wide body of research that demonstrates that these interventions in the first years of life both work and are extremely cost effective. So this is a famous slide from one of our gurus, Jim Heckman, the Nobel laureate from the University of Chicago, who has done a lot of the cost-benefit analysis of early childhood interventions, and for that matter, all investments in human capital. So Jim actually came to the early childhood space because he was asked to unwind some of the job training programs from the Clinton administration back in the 90s. And what he found was most of those investments actually had negative returns. So whatever the government spent to retrain people was not repaid in terms of their future income and earnings. And so he just, out of actually intellectual curiosity, went back and thought, well, where do investments in human capital have the greatest return on investment? He just took himself all the way back to preschool and looked at some of the studies there and found when you hear about the $7 return on investment, that's Professor Heckman's work, and that really comes from some of the groundbreaking early education studies that were done. But what's interesting now is when you go and talk to Professor Heckman, he's not interested in preschool anymore. He's only interested in birth to two, because that's where he thinks all the biggest returns are, and of course with families as well as with children. But it's also, what's very interesting is he's now also looking at the returns on investment when we consider some of the health effects of early education programs. And while early education programs aren't necessarily designed to improve health, again, when we think about the health impacts of stress and poor executive function behaviors over time, it turns out that in fact they're very, very effective health interventions. And when we add those returns to the educational and income returns that Professor Heckman has found, we actually blow that $7 out of the water. So look forward to a new slide that when Professor Heckman has an opportunity to add in some of the health effects, and it will be even steeper. And this is why it's my great privilege to lead an organization that is looking in many ways as possible to close that achievement gap and prevent it from opening. For over 30 years, the Ounce of Prevention Fund has advocated, demonstrated, innovated, educated anyone, everyone, that we can find about the importance of investing in the first few years of life. You know, we know, as Warren Buffett says, that all men are created equal, and that lasts for about 15 seconds. So we are a society that really holds fast to this notion of equal opportunity, and yet we now know with brain science that equal opportunity does not mean a kindergarten seat at age 5. It means access to high-quality learning environments beginning at birth, and support for families to create high-quality interactions and homes for their children beginning at birth. So really our focus is to build from the science and help adults foster these relationships and these healthy environments that are the basis for building stable and healthy adults. Well, changing adult behavior is complicated, and so we actually believe that there's no one solution that we can take to this work. We believe that change takes effort on many fronts. And while we as an organization are focused solely on children from before birth through age 5, we work across many disciplines. We think about what children and families need and how we can build programs to support them. We focus on the adults who work with children, the teachers, the home visitors, and the leaders who need professional development to do their best work. And we work at the systems level with professionals and policymakers at local, state, and federal levels to ensure that public dollars are used to their best effect. So we have a very varied staff. People on our staff focused on program, people focused on policy, researchers, lawyers, social workers, and they talk to each other every day. So this really dynamic interaction around this problem is really one of the most exciting things about the way we work, but really seeing these as holistic problems that require action on many fronts. We're very excited to have the opportunity to partner here in North Chicago with Superintendent Ben Martindale and his team. And it's been a great opportunity for us to put this sort of interaction in process. So we've been able to work here in North Chicago to help the school district think about how to create a high-quality learning environment across infancy and into kindergarten, and ensuring that the most at-risk children are reached with the best services. Some of our brilliant leaders are here today, Jonathan Dostler and Kristen Brown, who are working in partnership with the school district. We're also very privileged to work with One Hope United and on home visiting as well. And we're very excited that North Chicago has launched the Green Bay Early Childhood Center and has been able to receive preschool expansion grants to fund new preschool slots and to expand their preschool opportunities to full-day opportunities. This is ongoing, a very elaborate work. Again, having the adults work together in service for education is complicated, and getting quality and improving quality and helping people do their jobs better is ongoing and endless work, but it's exciting because it has tremendous impacts on the outcomes for children and families. And we have seen, again, that quality and improving access to high-quality services can have very dramatic effects, as you've seen here in Lake County. So we're very grateful for the support of the States Family Foundation and the United Way and many others who have really made this a community effort to improve high-quality learning here in North Chicago. And the work of North Chicago is just one area where we have, where we are trying to bring the expertise of policy program and research to bear. We actually, as an organization, are working across the country with programs in partnership with organizations in 20 states and in the District of Columbia. And this partnership is really about sharing everything that we know how to do with as many folks as we can who can work at the community level and share best practices. We are very ambitious in this work. Our goal is really nothing short of changing the world. We really believe that this generation of children, the 6 million children in our country who currently, under the age of 5, who are currently living in poverty, have the right, demand our attention, and must really find a way to allow them to be successful, this generation of children, be successful for us, for them, and for our nation's future. So I am thrilled to have the opportunity to lead this organization. I'm still jumping out of bed and looking forward to learning more and having a greater impact in partnership with all of you. And again, I want to thank and congratulate all of you here, because this is really an example of what happens when a community comes together and really tries to make change for its youngest citizens. You are all engaged in that project, and it is a tremendous opportunity for the families here in Lake County, and you're doing great work. So thank you. I'm happy to take any questions, or I don't know, are we allowed to do that?